Welcome to LeadWisely by WonderTour. Today, we're talking about human-machine interactions, and we're doing it through the lens of Ford versus Ferrari. This is an awesome film that has humans working with machines to accomplish these nearly impossible goals. Brian, let's start out with a tough question. Why do large organizations always seem to fail to innovate? Because in Ford versus Ferrari, we see this Ford Motor Company having to try to change to become a racing company, to have a different persona and identity, but it's a very challenging thing for them to do.
Yeah, this is a great question. This touches on a thing we've talked about a couple times. It's almost the definition of a large successful organization, right? Is that by definition an organization that has become successful, has become as big as a Ford Motor Company in the 60s, is really good at something. And they're not good at something because they are running a bunch of little experiments. They're good at something because a whole bunch of people would have fairly standardized processes and they're doing it at scale very, very well. The challenge with that, of course, is that by definition that process tends not to want to innovate, right? Especially one of the Ford guy quotes in here, right, is Ford means reliability. That's the Ford way. Like these are process phrases. One of our running comments or jokes on this is that middle management in a large organization are like the white blood cells of the organization. Their job is to reject change. They were promoted to their level because they were successful in whatever the standard way of doing things is. And you can't be good at that. You can't sustain it unless you don't let things change, unless you don't let anything screw up. The problem, of course, is that when that way of doing things, when that status quo, when that set of processes is starting to become uncompetitive, it's really hard to introduce change because you've got an organization that is designed to reject it, an organization that is designed to squash innovation. And so it's almost the definition of a large company is that it's an organization that has successfully resisted all of the disruptions that would mess up their current process.
Yeah, so it's almost like the system is designed not to be able to change, or at least that's what large systems becomes. So, as we go forward in this episode, let's talk about now how do you overcome that for your organization? How do you get past organizational stasis or organizational drift or these different things that plague us, causing us to have these static systems that don't allow us to respond to the needs of the customer?
Right, and so I love this for WonderTour. We talk about leadership archetypes, and in this movie we've got Henry Ford II, the Deuce, the boss, the grandson of Henry Ford, whatever the guy who's running the company, and we have this great moment where he sort of recognizes that this is not that his company's not thriving. And what we get to watch through the course of this movie is a couple different levels of leadership working on this innovation challenge. But at the Deuce level, we have the I'm the CEO, I have all the resources and all of the authority, and I have a bunch of people working for me that are used to doing things a certain way. How do you, as a leader in that situation, actually support and empower change? How do you let something happen through your organization that is very different than the standard operating procedure? How do you get permission for it? How do you get people to actually go do it? And how do you keep the organization from killing it? I'm Brian Nutwell,
And I'm Drew Perot.
and we are on a journey to become better leaders by touring fantastic worlds and inspiring more by going on a wonder tour.
We connect leadership concepts to story context because it sticks to our brains better. You can find out more at WonderTourPodcast.com.
Yes, you can. So yeah, let's talk about business agility. Let's talk about you're the Deuce. Congratulations, Drew. You're now the boss of a very large, very successful organization, and you're starting to worry that you're falling behind. Your competitors are eating your lunch, that the new generation of customers doesn't love your product as much as the last generation of customers does. So what do you do? What does the Deuce do in this situation?
Yeah, we get this great piece of storytelling right at the beginning where he comes out and he shuts off all the machines or has everybody kind of come out into like a town hall style format and addresses the people, says, "You hear that? That's what we're going to become. If we don't change, all of this is going to cease to exist." this is so he has the initiative. He has the knowing that like we have to do something. He has that as the top leader of the company. He has that big understanding that things are changing. You know, the voice of the customer is telling us that our competitors are superior to us in ways that they haven't been in the past. Obviously, that's also going to impact us financially. It's going to impact every person who works here, who finds purpose here, who has relationships here. What are we going to do differently? And so he tries to incite people with new ideas. He wants radical innovators, basically. He wants people to step up and say, this is what I think we should do to change, because he personally isn't at the level of the information to be able to know those things.
So yeah, so we get this great, man comes to my office with an idea. That man gets to keep his job. Now we're recording this in 2023. I would not suggest using the word "man" in that phrase if you want to try this in your office. Perhaps
Or
be a
doing
little
that
bit
at
less
all necessarily.
maybe be a little bit less gender specific and a little bit less threatening about it might be a more modern approach. But the concept of my door is open to anybody in this organization who has an idea how to make us more competitive, how to make us better. I want radical innovators to come talk to me personally as the boss, break the chain of command, go outside your job description, tell me what your ideas are. That's pretty powerful, right? That is a strong realization from the top. Like, no, I'm serious about this. To start, I'm not going to pick the three people that are already vice presidents and say, congratulations, you're the new business innovator. I'm going to look for ideas throughout the organization of any type. And with any luck, if you try this in your organization, you'll have at least one Lee Iacocca who's plugged into your customers and who's like, hey, we've got a generation of 17-year-olds with money in their pockets and they like the Impala a lot better than they like the Ford product right now. We need something for them. We need to refurbish our image. I have an idea. It's a first step, right? It's a give me some ideas. Which of these things might make sense, might be big enough and powerful enough, and things that we could reasonably do.
It's a recognition that we have a problem, but it's not a solution to the problem. And at least, like you said, he knows that he doesn't have the solution today to that
Mm-hmm.
problem, and he needs help getting to that solution. So, in a lot of ways, like you already have stated, Henry Ford II is not necessarily the most like the type of leader that we look up to on WonderTour, at least in the way that he treats people. But the way that he thinks, he's not that far off. He is that type of a visionary leader that knows we need to go forward, that's trying to empower people. He's just doing it in a way that sometimes, at least in our culture today, would be taken as like demeaning to people.
So let's keep following the lesson. All right. So then they do the first thing that a large organization would reasonably want to do. Like, hey, we want a new function. We've decided the new thing we're going to have is racing. What are we going to do? We're going to spend a bunch of money and go buy another organization that's good at racing and just insert them into our company. Right. This is a very natural reaction. It's probably the shortest distance between 2 points. Let's just do an acquisition. Right. So they try to acquire Ferrari, and we get to see very skillfully framed through the cinematography here. We get to see that there are some pretty big cultural differences between Ford and Ferrari. And so, to no one's surprise, and to the benefit of the movie, this doesn't work out. Ferrari throws it back in their face and is uninterested in being purchased by Ford. In the real history, the Fiat purchase happens later. It's not quite as dramatic as we see on the screen, but in practice, Ford does get extremely offended by their interactions with Ferrari and decide not only do they want to win races because they think it'll be good for Ford, but because they're personally really wanting to demonstrate their superiority over this other company.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an emotional piece to it as well, there for sure.
So okay, so that didn't work. We tried to buy it, and it didn't, and we couldn't buy innovation. So now we want to find another way of getting innovation. All right, well, can we build it? Can we find some internal people and some allies and throw a bunch of money at the problem and create our own racing team, our own innovation team? So how does that go?
So, of course, they go to the people within the network that they know that potentially could run a racing team. And one of the people that they just happen to be aware of is Carroll Shelby, who has already himself won Le Mans, which is the race that they're trying to win. So, he's one of the first people that they want to go to. And they literally go to him with a blank check. There is a literal aspect to it, like we will pay whatever it takes to beat Enzo and to become good at racing. But there's also this figurative piece of it that the old culture just thinks money is going to buy a win, basically. Like, we'll give you any amount of money, we just have to win this race. And one of the immediate things feedback that they get from Shelby is, first thing you have to know is you can't buy a win at this race. And he doesn't actually even reveal to them initially there, what you actually need, right? He says, what does it take to win Le Mans? And then you just don't, as the audience and as the Ford Motor Company representative, you don't get an answer to that. And later on, he does come back with that answer, and he says a pure racer, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Right. And but he does say, like, yeah, money will get you to the green flag, right? You can build a car. You can get permission to at least start the race if you're willing to stand up a new organization, if you're willing to put the resources into it, if you're willing to empower people to do some amount of stuff. And so this is, so Ford's willing to take this next step. All right, we can't just buy a company, so now we're going to basically create a company. We're going to take an existing small organization, Shelby American. We're going to give them enough resources and support, and designers from Ford of Europe that actually are designing the race car. We're going to kind of bash them all together. So we're going to find all the moving pieces we can. We're going to try to make this race team, and we're going to tell Carroll Shelby, great, you're in charge. Go make us a race team. And it's still Ford Motor Company, so what happens?
Yeah, so of course they try to put in charge the business executives who can manage the program. And of course, as we talked about in the first segment, what do those people want to do? They want to adhere to the current processes and standards that exist in the system. They want to adhere to the current cultural norms. And so they want like a pure hierarchy. They want to have everything be the current and old Ford branding. They are not open to new ideas, and they think that we should just be able to lay out a plan and execute it and win the race. And so what they do is they enforce to Carroll that they are going to have their own driver driving the race instead of Ken Miles, who's this radical innovator. And of course, what happens is they are not able to win the race, even though they had a lot of money and radical ambitions.
Right. And so this is probably a thing that really happens. So this is certainly a thing that really happens. We've both been through this, in a large organization where the large organization may not recognize which pieces of its standard operating procedure, which pieces of its self-image as an organization are not compatible with the new thing that it wants to do, right? With the innovation. So the self-image of Ford means reliability, and Ford means the race driver standing on the podium is clean cut and well spoken and going to represent Ford really well is a marketing thing, right? On one level, the whole thing is a marketing thing, right? We want to go racing because we want to look good on television. But on the other level, like the clean cut racer standing on the podium saying nice things about Ford and being very professional is only valuable if that person has won the race.
Yeah.
So you sacrificed the ultimate, the primary, most important goal of we have to win the race for a secondary goal of we have to have somebody that looks like a Ford person standing on the podium, right? And they just confuse those two things, and as a result, they don't fully commit to the primary goal. But this is a real thing, right? Large organizations cannot help themselves. The white blood cells are going to try to either reject or absorb the change. Like, okay, fine, we're doing this, then we're going to do it the Ford way. And you may not recognize as the new thing is happening, it will feel risky. It will feel alien. It will feel bad. It will feel scary. It will feel threatening to your job. It will feel threatening to your sense as a manager. If you're one of these other managers, you're going to feel like, oh, this is not right. This is not the way we do things around here. And this is a very natural thing that happens. And so we see the great example here. Great, they don't win the race. They confused their process with the ultimate goal, and so they didn't. The first round isn't successful. So now back to the Deuce. So now you're the boss. You failed. You're upset that you failed. You're like, all right, this didn't work. I threw a bunch of money. I gave you all this stuff. Like, why didn't it work? And he's on the verge of pulling the plug on the whole thing. Like he's now I'm more embarrassed than I was, and I've spent a whole bunch of money, and Ford doesn't look any better. Like, why should I keep going? Carroll talks him back into it, and so he says, "All right, great. Go to war. You only report to me. Everything is fine. go back to do the whole thing. But inevitably, the same thing happens again. Comes back around. The Deuce is flying back out to visit Shelby American. He's bringing all the Ford executives. They're going to tell Carroll that he's not involved anymore. So let's lead us up to our mountaintop moment where our magnanimous leader of the day, Henry Ford II, the Deuce, is coming to tell Carroll Shelby that he's not in charge again and coming to basically hamstring and handicap the team again. What happens?
Yeah, so on Wonder Tour, we believe that we're on a journey. So when we're on this journey, it can kind of be like a hike. Sometimes you're going to see some vista, you're going to see some lake, some peak. So this is why we call it the mountaintop moment of the episode. It's where we can kind of like get that vantage point to see the theme that we're looking at, to see it in practice, in terms of a actual scene in our movie that we're drawing from. So today, our moment is when we have Carroll Shelby. He realizes that there's a threat immediately as soon as they arrive. He basically is about to get boxed out of being able to complete the mission, and his response to that is first he locks Leon, the Ford executive, in his office, and then he runs outside and he takes the Deuce into the GT40 that they're working on, and then he gives him that experience of driving. And it's all in this one moment. He's taking him up to like super high speeds. He's flying in between barrels and taking tight turns. And at the end, you have this really visceral experience that the Deuce is going through where he's like, I never realized that this is what racing was actually like. Why? Because he was always just watching it. He was watching somebody else fly by. But when you're actually in the car, when you're experiencing the technology for yourself, it's a whole lot different than just developing the technology. So I think what he realizes is we need to trust the people who know about the experience, not just the people who know about the engineering and the technology. We can have the best engineers and technology folks, but if we don't have the best driver who knows how to work the experience of the course with the technology we're developing, how are we possibly going to win? And so, of course, he ends up deciding to work with Carroll and work with Ken Miles, but he only does it under one condition, and it's a stake that they make. And of course, we have our innovator in Carroll who's like, I will stake my entire company on Ken Miles winning the Daytona 500. If he can win this next race, you let him drive Le Mans. If not, you can have my entire company.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a really cool leadership moment for the Deuce here. Like he's sitting in the car, and this is the first time in this whole sequence, for as sincere as he is about wanting to rescue his company, for as sincere as he is about racing being the thing that's going to revitalize their fortunes, for as sincere as he is about empowering people, right? Part of the reason he keeps falling back into the old Ford ways is he doesn't actually get it. He doesn't actually understand how different this form of car engineering is from what he's familiar with. Right? He's just never gotten in the chair. He's never really tried to get it. And so once he gets down into it and he gets it, he's like, oh, he understands how the normal Ford executives just they don't live in this world. They don't understand what it takes to succeed here. He understands how different it is from the domain that he's used to playing with. So he's like, yay! I now understand that I need to empower the very best people who really love this stuff. But how do I tell for sure how committed they are? How do I tell for sure that they're not just like talking a big game? That they're actually willing to do what it takes to win this. He extracts a pretty dramatic concession. Like this guy is so serious about winning Le Mans that he's willing to risk his entire company on just getting the right driver in the car. Like not even the whole winning Le Mans thing. He's like, I'm willing to risk my whole company just so you can let Ken Miles be our primary driver. That's a level of commitment that tells me that this person is a truly committed innovator. That this person is like putting it all on the line for this goal that we are perfectly aligned. Because I'm putting my company on the line, like Ford Motor Company's reputation. I'm tying it to this activity. You should be at least that committed. And so that is an interesting moment. It's an interesting leadership moment for him where he realizes that he's going to have to change his company or change his operation more than he thought. And he also realizes kind of he's starting to sense like what, does this person have the level of commitment to really get done what I think we need?
Yeah, and it gets fused together here, I think, with a little bit of our business agility theme. So I want to use this quote from Scaled Agile. In today's digital economy, the only truly sustainable competitive advantage is the speed at which an organization can sense and respond to the needs of its customers. Its strength is its ability to deliver value in the shortest sustainable lead time, to evolve and implement new strategies quickly, and to reorganize to address emerging opportunities better. And that is just as true in Ford versus Ferrari almost as it is today. It might not be a digital economy for them back then, but in that emerging tech world and the changing experiences of the driver that they're talking about here, how are they going to be able to change, right? It's to be able to follow the needs of the customers. And if you're still building for the old reliable, hey, we just need to be able to churn out as many of these things as possible at as low of a cost as possible, which was what made Ford great, then you're not going to be following the needs of the changing market because the market always seems to change. You never have a competitive advantage for forever. It's always going to erode and a new one will need to be developed. So, really, it is the only true competitive advantage, as this quote articulates pretty well, being able to sense and respond to the needs of your customers. And in this situation, right, as they're trying to change, the way to do that is to put somebody who actually understands what the experience needs to be inside of the car. Don't put the person who knows the old experience and is really good at making and developing the old experience. Put the new person in there. Put Carroll in charge, the person who is passionate about paving a new road towards a new type of race car. Let's get him out there and let's give him a chance.
Yeah, yeah, because we talk about the other kinds of competitive advantages, right? The competitive advantage of I have better technology, or I have a better product, or I have a really great production process, right? Or I have the best sales organization in the world. These are legitimate competitive advantages, but they aren't necessarily sustainable because they're attached to they're relatively static, right? The sustainable competitive advantage is being able to continue to evolve. The sustainable competitive advantage is being able to reorganize to address emerging opportunities better, like your quote says, right? And I love that they word the use speed, right? Racing is a very an easy to understand example of an organizational challenge because it forces you to do, it forces you to have humans doing things and machines doing things in ways that interact nicely with each other. It forces you to be ready when the starting gun goes off. Nobody cares. Like if you have the perfect race car 5 minutes after the race started, it doesn't help you very much, right? So all of these things, as an analogy, it works really well because it's a very clearly framed problem. But it also is a problem that forces a lot of these other organizational behaviors, especially in the context of an engineering organization. Like a competition will force your organization to get better, or it will expose how good it is at evolving, at good competing. It highlights this organizational agility, and it definitely, if you don't have it, then these things will show them very quickly.
Yeah, and you can't have organizational agility and you can't move in these quick iterations and bursts. And we'll talk about this more in our next episode, but without empowerment, without bringing the decision making to the level of the people that have the information, right? The executive for the Ford Motor Company doesn't have the right information to be able to design and implement an incredible racing team. And you see so many like funny over the top things about that. Oh, they control the RPMs even in the vehicles in the race. You have that like amazing hubris of the driver to, or I mean, of the executive to giving the interview at the Daytona, saying like, "Oh yeah, we control everything that these people are doing out there. We are the ones responsible for their success."
Yeah, yeah, that's so let's talk about kind of what does this look like in practice, right? What does it, what does it look like when it's successful in practice? What does it look like when it's not successful in practice? The example that we were talking about earlier that came to my mind was the sort of the counter example, that how bad can it get if you're not agile, right? If you're not organizationally adapting, is the U.S. government military product development process. So for developing a new aircraft carrier, a new plane, or a satellite or something like that, is legendarily expensive and slow and has 19 levels of subcontractors to it. So actually, I read a report about this a couple years ago. I was involved in a product development consulting project where About 30 years ago, the government was concerned that the products were delayed and they were getting very expensive, and they would get to the end and they would find out that they wouldn't work. It's like, all right, so they looked at the industry and said, we're going to introduce a stage gate process where we're going to check pretty early on if we've got everything going reasonably well before we give you any more money. So we won't just keep throwing money at you for 5 or 10 years. You've got a couple of years worth of, getting to the prototype stage, and then you have to pass all of these requirements. You have to pass this gate before you can go to the next stage. So they did that. So fast forward a couple of decades, and what does that turn into? Well, the stage gate process itself is now a cottage industry, right? Where it takes a year and a half just to make the documents to be able to pass the stage gate, even once your aircraft carrier or plane or whatever is ready to be evaluated. And now you're spending millions and millions of dollars on creating documents for this report, and it's added more and more time, and you're getting farther and farther behind. And what's happening now is that the technology that you started with is becoming increasingly obsolete, right? You made decisions, you passed your stage gate 6 years ago, 2 gates ago, but you can't even buy those parts anymore, right? Because that's not the current technology, and it just gets worse and worse, right? So investing in agility is the only way to stay on top of this, kind of constant change. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that big organizations will naturally just thrive in this new world. But that sense of like, oh, we're going to lock in the process and avoid messing up is 100% guaranteed to become out of date very quickly, is 100% guaranteed to close off opportunities to make something better.
Yeah, and that's generally the type of solution that the current system proposes. This is what we have to be very, very careful of. And this is where top leaders do have the responsibility in terms of when your organization is making a shift. We have to let's go back to what we said before on, hey, we need to identify the pieces of our current self that are not compatible with this vision of our future self. So the current system, how many times have you seen this, Brian? You have an issue, it hits the customer or whatever, it hits the metrics, and somebody gets tasked with making a countermeasure. And of course, what type of countermeasure does a white blood cell try to create? It tries to create a countermeasure to force everything back into the current system when the current system was what created that defect in the first place. So all you end up doing is creating layers of process on top of layers of process and forgetting what your organizational purpose and your mission actually was. Now, like you said, the mission is to get past the stage gate. But why do we have to get past the stage gate? What value does it provide for us to get past the stage gate? We have to constantly ask ourselves things like that. What value does this provide? Is this who we want to be as an organization? If we don't second guess ourselves constantly on those sort of things, are we actually adhering to our mission? Then it's very easy to take that higher purpose that you had initially, your first goal, your primary goal, and accidentally drift away and replace it with something like, oh, our goal is to get through these 23 stage gates.
Yeah, and so we got one of these. We actually got the explicit analogy for this in this movie, right? At one of their summit meetings when Carroll has to talk Henry Ford into continuing the race team, right? He uses hey, look out at these factories. These used to build B-29 bombers or something in World War II. I want you to go to war. Now, realistically speaking, no human should ever want to actually go to war. Like, this is a terrible idea. But as an analogy of like, make the goal the most important thing, right? And subordinate everything else to that, for a race team or anything else. Yeah, if your job is to build bombers, then the goal is not to pass the stage gates. The goal is to have, the goal is to have defense technology, is to be able to have things that will fly around in the air.
And the goal really is to protect your humans, right?
Right. Yeah.
To give your humans a good life
to get the
live.
war over with as quickly as possible, or however you want to phrase it. That organizational clarity is really important. So I think we're getting into the key takeaways here. Like what should we learn from the Deuce's experience of leadership and what he demonstrated from the top of Ford Motor Company in this movie, right? So one of those things is definitely the sense of like what actually is the goal. Like you identified the problem. We're stale, we're going to go out of business, we're not competitive. Okay, great. What's the goal? What are you trying to accomplish that will help you solve that problem? And if the goal is we have to win Le Mans convincingly, we're going to crush Ferrari, we're going to demonstrate our technology support, then other goals have to be subordinated to that one, right? We're going to look good, but the standing on the podium talking into the microphone is important, but it's not more important than that, right? You can't have the one without the other. So subordinating the goals to the primary goal and getting everybody on board with that all the way up and down the organization is one of the most important things that the top level leaders can do. You're not going to drive the car. You're not going to engineer the car. You're not going to engineer the brake swap system. You don't even know that that's a thing, right? But you can make sure that those people have enough authority to do it.
Yeah, I think number two is tech is not a sustainable competitive advantage. We can't assume that what we're currently doing in terms of processor technology is going to continue to be an advantage in the future. The only competitive advantage that is sustainable is to have an organization that is quickly responding to the needs of emerging kind of customer experiences, changes in the
New
world, in the
technology.
markets. Exactly.
And at the beginning of the movie, that's how Ferrari is portrayed, right? Ferrari wins Le Mans every year because every year the cars get faster and faster, and every year they learn more stuff, and they can just keep doing it, right? That's the model that they're trying to accomplish from within this behemoth of a Ford Motor Company. And then I think we kind of hit on it a little bit, but the idea of pushing the decisions down to the lowest possible level is is required. And then I don't know what else, got any others for takeaways?
Yeah, I think the one other takeaway maybe is for the Deuce specifically, to be able to get through a transformation, you have to be willing to empower the type of people that the organization might not normally like, because those are the people that are going to shake up the system. And one way to do that, it's just a technique and a tactic, is you can those people generally are willing to stake things because they believe in what they're doing and they're going to work hard to achieve them. So using a stake model is like a kind of a win-win. Now, again, not the only model to get your radical innovators working on things and going in a direction, but it's one technique that you can use to give them an opportunity to innovate without creating too much, stress on the current organization.
Well, it's a way to tell, it's a way to sense whether the innovators are really committed, right? And, so giving them a possible risk reward is definitely, proportional to the challenge that you've given them. But then giving them air cover, like, okay, right, fine, you guys get to make the decisions. Like, so I love that. The only other thing I would add really is just from the Deuce example, right, is get in the car. Like, you don't have to live there. Don't pretend that you're going to be go leading the innovation, but do your best to understand how this new thing is different than the thing that you already do.
Awesome. I think we wrap it up there, Brian. This has been great as always. Looking forward to part two.
Yeah, so we spent time talking about the top-down innovation challenge in this episode. What did Henry Ford have to do to enable innovators to go win Le Mans in his organization? We're going to look at it from bottom up next time. What if you're Carroll Shelby? What does it take to run that crazy radical organization? What does it take to go after that goal? What does it take to manage a difficult personality like a Ken Miles if they happen to be the person that you really need? I think that's it for this week. So thanks again for joining us as everyone here on WonderTour. And we're looking forward to having you with us again next week. In the meantime, just remember, as always, character is destiny.